Welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the framework for fiscal responsibility. And joining me in the studio this evening is the Honorable Premier himself, Mr. McKeeva Bush. He has been outlining and giving us an overview of exactly what the FFR, the framework for fiscal responsibility, is. And now we're going to get into talking about some of the things that are laid out in the framework for fiscal responsibility that's been put together by the United Kingdom. And of course, something that Mr. Bush says he agrees with and that it needs to be done. However, when we were going to our break, he did say that he also requested that changes be made to the FFR because there needs to be public consultation and so forth. Mr. Bush, thank you so much for being here with us this evening here on Talk with the Nation. You're a show that's developed by you to get the facts out there to our listeners and to the Cayman Islands people. So let's talk about the framework for fiscal responsibility.
Just before I get into that, I just wanted to say that when me and Mr. Bellingham signed the agreement, I was going to say that and I stopped, but I had asked for it to be taped, and they taped it. Okay. So I said some of those things that I said here earlier. Mm-hmm. I didn't mince words. I did say, look, this is why it was needed, mm-hmm. but here are various points.
Right.
Well, they taped it so that I could have the tape to get back to the local television here. Mm. But because I said certain things, and I asked for them, they said no. Well, they said to me, well, certain things didn't come out good in the videoing, and therefore we can't really use it.
So, oh, wow.
So I didn't get to have to
have it documented in a video form.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, well, they know how to do things, eh? Mm-hmm. Now, what is the FFR about? The FFR is a document that is meant to achieve laudable and worthwhile objectives that I agree to. Mm-hmm. That government undertakes. One, that government undertakes effective medium-term planning to ensure that the full impact of fiscal decisions made by government is understood.
Okay.
Two, that government puts value for money considerations at the heart of its decision-making process. Mm-hmm. Value for money, not processes.
Right.
Now, you got to get value for money. There are processes.
Sure.
Now, it doesn't mean just ticking a box. Oh, so you ran out for tender, that's it. But going out to tender, it costs the government a little bit more. Does that make sense? No. Yes, so two, that government puts value for money considerations at the heart of its decision-making process. Three, there is effective management of risk by government.
Okay.
And four, that government delivers improved accountability in all public sector operations.
Okay.
So let me say immediately then that these objectives are good. This is the things that I want. Mm-hmm. My concern is, however, that the degree of administrative effort that the FFR states should be carried out to achieve these good objectives mm-hmm. are just back-breaking, and more important, it is my view that the FFR suggested procedures and the way they want it done are just not practical for Cayman.
Okay.
They are not practical for Cayman.
Right.
The objectives are good. Yes, that's what I want. I keep repeating it too. Mm-hmm. The means of achieving them that the FFR specifies, I think, is questionable, and so bankers have told me the same thing. I am convinced that the objectives can be met. What the UK wants and what we need mm-hmm. and what they need to ensure that their responsibilities to us, although I don't know what that is, because they have said that if anything go wrong here, they're not paying for it. But anyway, I'm convinced that the objectives can be met by alternative procedures.
Okay.
I want to demonstrate to anyone listening just some of what the FFR requires to achieve two of the four objectives I mentioned before. Achieving value for money and managing risk. Mm-hmm. Now here's what the FFR says should be done in order to achieve value for money. For all projects with a lifetime value about $10 million, government must retain independent accounting, independent legal, independent economic, independent environmental, and other technical advice as appropriate to ensure robust investment appraisals are produced And for all proposed capital projects with an expected lifetime value of $10 million or more, appraisals of the projects will be published for public consultation prior to procurement, prior to any kind of signing of any kind of agreements. Should be published. Now, I would think that any sensible person would have to ask whether the arrangement I have just read are sensible and practical for Cayman. They may be sensible and practical for large, industrialized, and more advanced economies. But my view is that they are not practical for Cayman, not in the way they are currently framed. So the FFR would have government retain independent accounting, independent legal, independent financial, independent economic, and environmental advice for a capital project that could have a lifetime value of as little as $10.5 million. And I say that cannot be practical for the island. Such advice will come for all those things at a very significant cost to government. Just to retain an advisor now for the port, it costs us a lot of money.
Do you believe, though, Mr. Premier, that by putting these sorts of policies in place and must-haves in place for the Cayman Islands government, that it seems that maybe all of this is being done to stall projects from going ahead? Well, is that a good way of looking at it?
As when the letter I wrote back to him, to the minister, after the governor made that statement, that's what I told them. They didn't want my administration, and none other after this either, to get ahead. Cayman will be brought to its knees. It will be brought to its knees. Let us look at the other specification I mentioned previously, which are appraisals. The projects must be publicized for public consultation prior to going ahead with the project. And I say some of this can be done, but it's not an entirely practical way to run a government. When would the consultation, the back and forth, when would that stop? There is no guidance on this important point within the FFR. There's none. Any government, not just my government, but any government would find progress within a 4-year electoral cycle very difficult to achieve. You think not? Let me just tell you this. When I was trying to get the dock done in Georgetown, back between 2000 and 2004 or 5, actually, there were two sides fighting. The North businessmen and South businessmen, remember? There's been all these arguments about the North and South. There was a big, huge fight. Nobody could decide where they wanted it to go. And we took long time, what must have been 2 years, trying to get it sorted out. 2 years. Nobody could decide. At some point, government has to say, look, I'm sorry, we got to go ahead. This got to be done. So that's the kind of thing can happen in that scenario that I just mentioned. And I wish to repeat that, excuse me, the objectives in the FFR are good. The means of achieving them for Cayman are in many instances not practical for a jurisdiction of 100 square miles of 3 islands and a population of 55,456 people as of October 2010, when the last census was done. Now, let us look at what the FFR says about managing risk. The FFR states that the interest cost of government debt and the interest cost of all borrowing by statutory authorities and government companies must not exceed 10% of government's revenue, the interest costs. Now, 2 points immediately arise here. It is grossly unfair to have the interest costs of public entities' borrowings included in the calculation. But the FFR does not allow the public entities' revenues to be included in that calculation. And so how many households, let alone a national government, have a debt service ratio of a maximum of 10%? Now, I'm against a load of borrowing. As I said, that gets you in trouble. You have to do this sensibly. Right? I don't think it's a 10% ratio. I think it's how sensibly you do it. In today's economics, any year's economics, too much will certainly burden the country, and we have seen that. So I've been against that, and that's why we ourselves didn't borrow any money. We borrowed to finish the projects.
Right, but 10% is certainly not realistic.
No, I don't think it's realistic. A person approaching a bank for a loan can easily get a loan with a debt service ratio as high as 40 to 50% typically. Yet the entire public sector, the Cayman Islands, must operate within a very low threshold of 10%. So I hasten to add that I do not advocate massive borrowings. The PPM borrowed $400 million in 4 years, right? So quite the opposite. I don't want to do that.
Right.
And didn't do it. I have always pushed to reduce borrowings and to try to save money and to avoid borrowings when it is possible to do so. The upshot of all this is that the entire public sector then in our islands will be hamstrung,
right,
unable to develop and enhance its infrastructure, whether it's roads that we might need, without getting explicit authority from the UK each and every time the effect of the borrowing would exceed a very low 10% debt service threshold.
Right.
You would have to go back to them every time. I just can't agree with it, because there are times that you're going to have to do something that you can do, and yet the UK could tell you no. And what all this will do, and they don't think they're fooling me. The budget that I have produced will get us out of their grip in 2-3 years, okay?
Okay.
The budget that we have produced and the other budgets that we have set, the expenditures we have set, limits we have set,
right,
which we had to do because they wanted us to do that. Now they come up with FFR, and then they come, when we made all of that in 2-3 years' time, then we can walk away and say, I don't need to talk to you anymore, UK. I just need to keep you abreast of what I'm doing, because after all, they're the administering power country.
Right.
So what this will happen is we'll never get out of their grip. That's what will happen. But they don't think that I see that. Of course I see it. That's what will happen. So let me give another example of what I think is restrictive and the onerous nature of the FFR and the way it is, the phraseology of it, I would say. In paragraph 28A of the FFR states that government will only borrow to fund capital expenditures where the proposed project is forecast to yield sufficient revenues to fund the additional debt service costs. You couldn't do that with a school. Mind you, what the PPM did for $100 million school, no matter how much they laud it and how good the peat is on it and how green the grass is, it is something that we can't afford.
Right.
It is something that we couldn't afford, no matter how good it looks. So, but if we do need, that don't yield no immediate income. So we couldn't do it.
Right.
If government wanted to borrow to build a road, which we have to do at times, to comply with paragraph 28 of the FFR, government would have to introduce a toll on the road so that the road paid for itself. They wouldn't say that your car fees that you're paying, your license and so on, will come from that. No, you would have to introduce a direct fee.
Wow. Direct taxation is what we call it.
So to counter paragraph 28, we had to get the insertion of paragraph 28B, which states that the government can still borrow for a project, even though the project might not be able to pay for itself, provided government has surplus cash, resources from other sources to pay for the increased debt servicing costs that would arise from the borrowing of the project. So we got them to agree to that.
That's
wonderful. But that's not the first part of it. If we had left it alone, where would we be?
Right.
Now, what the FFR is not about, the FFR is not about the UK government developing the document to penalize or punish the Cayman Islands government for its fiscal performance. That's what they said. The FFR is a document that is not unique to the Cayman Islands either. Right. It is being applied to other UK overseas territory. BVI, it exists in the BVI and Anguilla. And those governments have also been asked to put FFRs equivalents in place in those territories. So we're not the only ones. So what I see the UK doing is to saying, look, if you're going to be, if I'm going to be your administering power, you can do what I say or else. Whether you think it's good for you, whether you lose more, your homes or not,
doesn't matter.
As long as this box is ticked, and I can get up in the House of Commons and say, this is what I got the Cayman Islands to do, then that's what we want you to do, and you're going to have to do it. Well, I don't believe in this day and age that I should be complying with that. Mind you, when they shouted the savings directive in its original form in my face, and I said, I'm sorry, I ain't going, that's taxation, I ain't going that route.
Right.
They tried it, and I took them to court, and we won. And we won.
Okay. We're going to take a break now on Talk with the Nation. We're going to be back with the Premier in just a few minutes to continue our discussion here on the show about the framework for fiscal responsibility. We're going to be opening up our phone lines too, so if you'd like to give us a call at 946-9898, that would be great with any questions or comments that you have for the Premier, the Honorable McKeeva Bush. Talk with the Nation will be back in just a few.
All things Cayman, present and future. This is Talk with the Nation with Donna Bush on Vibe FM, presented by the Premier, the Honorable McKeeva Bush.
Welcome back to Talk with the Nation. If you're just joining us, I have in the studio with me this evening the Honorable Premier, Mr. McKeeva Bush, and we're talking about the framework for fiscal responsibility. Now, our phone lines are open. The number to call is 946-9898. Please give us a call with your comments or questions for the Honorable Premier this evening here at our studios. Again, if you happen to miss the show will be on youtube.com/talkwiththenation or any of the other shows that you've missed as well. Also, next week we will not be here on Talk with the Nation. But we will be back on October the 17th. That's the following Wednesday. So we get a week's break, and then we come back with you again on all of the topical issues that's taking place in the Cayman Islands, and of course keeping you educated and up to date on exactly what's happening within our government. Mr. McKeeva, so we're talking about the framework for fiscal responsibility, and when we left the conversation, you were talking a little bit about the examples of other countries where, other than Cayman, that are overseas territories that the UK government.
Okay, let me finish up on this point then. We pose this question: why has the UK government found it desirable to develop the FFR, not only in Cayman, but in other territories?
Right.
Now, the UK government say it is all about the UK government trying to minimize its perceived contingent liabilities that might possibly arise from its relationship with its overseas territories. Now, that's what they say, but we have been told point blank in many meetings in the UK that if Cayman Airways failed, for instance, nothing happened, the UK don't stand responsible.
Oh, okay.
They don't stand responsible. That's what they said.
Right.
Unless they change that and can put it in writing too. But they say they have a contingent liability.
Okay.
So the UK government believes that the contents of an FFR type document will reduce the chances of an event occurring in one of its overseas territories that might cause the UK government to feel morally obliged to come to the financial rescue, to come to the financial rescue of any overseas territory. So, as an example, if an overseas territory were to default on a loan or debt obligation, the UK government say they would, while not legally obliged to pay that debt, might come under some pressure to assist in the repayment of that debt.
Okay.
That's what they're saying. So the UK government believes that the FFR type documents will minimize the chance of the UK government have to financially rescue one of its overseas territories.
Okay.
So I have no problem with that. I have no problem. If Cayman don't want to go off on its own, then we have to abide by certain things that the UK government wants. As simple as that.
Exactly.
However, they cannot be so draconian that to stop us from moving forward our economy.
Right.
And that is some of what is happening with the governor and his statements about procurement.
Okay. So
because it just can't be done their way. The box is not ticked.
Okay.
And as I say, you tick the box many times. They have ticked those boxes in the UK. Okay. And what happened? UK government lose because of what they did. It's not about that. Anything we do want to do, spend. It's about value for money. That's what the Cayman Islands government has to worry about. Are we getting good value for money? That's the big question.
Okay.
And that's what the UK government should be concerned about. Now, why the consultation with the private sector being done? It seems like their feathers are ruffled because it is being done, but it is for all those things that I said, the reasons that the government has sought private sector feedback on the FFR as it is presently formed, right? So we do believe, in closing these points, the objectives of the FFR are good. It's something that we support. I mean, I support as the Minister of Finance. The ways and means of achieving those objectives must be examined and explored with the private sector, who this will affect.
Okay, right.
That is the reason I have asked for feedback from a private sector committee. And the FFR seeks to promote good fiscal management, and this is government and something that we want. This is our government is all for good fiscal management, and we have achieved it as well.
Right.
We have achieved it, and the FFR is just, I think, a little overzealous in how it proposes that those noble objectives are achieved. So I trust that what I have said here will form some opinions and enlighten some people's opinions in regards to what it is, what it stands for, what it's all about, why we have it, and what are my intentions as the Minister of Finance and government support for it.
All right. Again, our phone lines are open here on Talk with the Nation. The number to call is 946-9898. The Minister for Finance and our Premier of the Cayman Islands, Mr. McKeeva Bush, is now available to take your calls with comments or questions. But we're going to continue our conversation here about the framework for fiscal responsibility. Mr. Bush, for the average person out there, when we talk about the framework for fiscal responsibility, what does it mean for them?
Well, the average person might not recognize, and it doesn't immediately impact them. But the day that the government has to do something, it certainly will impact the public of this country.
Okay.
Now, the good parts I have said. I mean, all the things that I've said about not over-borrowing, having the reports and reporting to the UK, we're going to have to do all of that. We are part of the UK.
Right.
We want them to administer us, and that's what they're doing.
Okay.
And so those things are good, but it really impact us. Okay. If we had to build a road and then put a toll on it, then you would have to pay. So
right.
Those are the kind of things that it will impact and hit the general public.
Okay, and you're talking about consultation. Any chance of public consultation on the FFR?
Yeah. You know, when I signed this, I came back and I tabled it in the House.
Right.
And done some explanations then about it. So now we are having the Financial Services Council and other bankers and so on, independent private sector members who are not part of Financial Services Council,
right?
Look at it and give some feedback.
Okay, is this a typical 21-day consultation or is it longer?
Well, it's a bit longer. We have the general thing where we can now have it into law. And when the changes come back, we would make any necessary tweaks or phraseology that might be needed.
Right.
So the general FFR has already been out. Right. So members of the House, and people can't say that it wasn't there. So what I'm looking now is a feedback for the various tweaks that certain bankers would feel is necessary.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the country's debt ratios and so forth. If we could talk a little bit about numbers and stuff that are laid out in the FFR and really what the big picture is as far as what we're expected to follow when it comes to the FFR and what the UK wants us to do. Is it far off from what we were able to do before? And if it is, are those numbers far off? And if they are, what do you think should be done about those types of things? Like our debt ratio, our borrowings, our reserve, what kind of reserve we should have in place? While
there are some people who would object. I'm not even going to object to that so much. I think it's restrictive.
Right.
But as I said, I don't want to leave this country. One of the things that I said, if I didn't get anything else done, I wanted to straighten out government finances. Because if government finances are not straightened out,
right,
so many things can happen. Devaluation of your currency, you get in serious problems. So over borrowing can do that, and therefore I certainly don't have a big problem with it is low, and it could be a little bit higher.
Right. Okay.
But I'm not going to quarrel about it going too high. What kind of feedback are you expecting from the private sector? And I think there would be some suggested tweaks on it. I'd be surprised. I mean, nobody's suggesting we scrap it.
Okay.
No, we have some suggestions that if we had to go to borrow, as I said earlier, that you have to be sensible.
Right.
You can't put the country in a position where even when UK agree for us that it is so onerous that we can spend half of what we're borrowing to get it done.
Right.
Right.
Now, there are many areas of the FFR, and what I would refer to as the mechanics. And you talked about value for money, managed risk. There are lots of other areas in there. For instance, contingent and actual liabilities, the processes, debt, that sort of stuff. Do you wish to address any of these areas so that our listeners out there can be better informed about some of them?
Sections.
For instance, it talks about processes. The Cayman Islands government will establish and maintain robust processes and then it gives a list of things that the government.
Which page are you talking about?
I'm on point 24. Number 24.
Process.
Running the processes. So there's just not about value for money and management. There's a whole list of things that they're expecting us to do.
And rightly so. Some of this is being done now.
Right.
I think a little bit strengthened. They are suggesting we strengthen some areas. For instance, measures. The government maintain robust process. Let's read it. To measure the performance of government departments and other bodies in receipt of public funds.
Right.
Allocate expense budgets, profile expenses, and monitor actual results against profile budgets in a timely manner. Determine revenue targets, profile receipts, and monitor actual results against budgets on a timely basis. Track and qualify developing risk to determine the value of actual and contingent liabilities, to assess calls on current expenditure budgets, and in exceptional cases, the reserves. Report total public sector debt, profile debt repayments, and determine debt service costs. Undertake timely internal and external audits and act on the findings.
Okay.
No, let's take that last one, for instance.
Right.
The PPM government went 4 years. 4 years without doing any budgets on them. The Auditor General came back and said Dan Duguay, who they were lauding, came back and said that there was one ministry alone that he couldn't account for 69 million. That was Charles Clifford ministry, right? $69 million. Now, they're the same people, to mind you, I should say this, that try to tell me how to run government, right? But they're right. You have to be credible. You have to have timely internal and external audits and act on what the audits tell us.
Right.
Now, mind you, you can find auditor generals that are biased and way out of whack on what they're saying.
Right.
And what they're saying. And I have proof of that. And that's why I'm saying this, not because you name Auditor General, that you got to sit down and listen and think that they're by belief what they're saying. Right? You got to make sure you check with a fine-tooth comb what they're telling you to do.
Okay. Right? All right. Let's talk a little bit about point 28, debt. The country's debt. It says, unless in exceptional circumstances, different arrangements are agreed in writing by the Cayman Islands government and the Secretary of State, the Cayman Islands government will borrow only to fund capital expenditure, which will yield sufficient revenues to fund debt service costs. I think you mentioned that.
That's what I was explaining
earlier. Right.
Earlier, yes.
And then it goes on, point 29, the Cayman Islands government will give preference to borrowing from concessional lenders, which should ensure that the lender's expertise is brought to projects. Explain that one a little bit for us.
Well, I want him to explain that to me. I'm getting the bankers.
Okay.
I'm getting the bankers to
unravel that.
Yeah, unravel it.
Okay.
I don't think it's all practical.
Right.
What they are telling us to do.
Right.
And as I said, what I want to be to ensure in putting this in place that what we are doing is not adding to costs.
Right.
As I say, it's not taking half of what you borrow to pay to find out what
about
borrowing
the economics and the environment and all these assessments, to get all these assessments done outside of government.
You need to do something in the government. Currently, there's, in fact, most of it. But to go out and get private sector ones, it's costly.
Absolutely. Now, the exchange of information is an interesting one for me. That's point 34. That's right below the partnership with the UK, where it says the Cayman Islands government will submit the information specified in a particular area, Annex C, to the persons from time to time specified by the United Kingdom government, which is something that we're already doing. They're talking about the FCO, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office.
Yeah, they get some information.
Right.
They get it a long time before other people get it.
Okay. Approvals processes, that's point 39, where it talks about the Cayman Islands government is not in compliance with the framework. Where the Cayman Islands government is not in compliance with the framework, the Cayman Islands government will present for the approval of the Secretary of State a plan that is consistent with the SPS to remedy the breach. Now, this is something that the government is already working with and already doing.
Yeah, these are things, as I say, they are restating the case. Maybe a little bit tweaks here and there, but they're restating what we're doing. We now have to do that. But that's what I'm telling you too. We didn't have to do all that before. Right. And so, I mean, we're doing that presently because we are, they have that control. Right. Mind you, the governor would have gotten all of that even when they never had control. The governor had access to all of this. The governor's duty is to then send it on to the UK, to his bosses in the UK. So they would have been getting it. But what they want is to put a process in place that even though you have gotten out of, or you have gotten within the ratios that they have prescribed, now you will never be able to do things on your own again.
Right. Now, the UK wants to set up a finance board. Let's talk a little bit about that and what your thoughts are on that and exactly how that would work, what that does.
Well, that's not stated in the FFR.
No, it's not.
But it is something that they asked to do, which actually, in taking over in 2009, I said to the then governor, Jack, which didn't do anything about it, and I said to this governor, look, I need an economist and I need an accountant that can help with the budget, that can, for instance, go from the department to department and see what they are doing and what expenditure is being put up, or when it is spent, what it is spent on, and what the balances of governments are at any given point. Right. Those are the things that I think are very valuable in managing government's risk, managing our finances. As Minister of Finance, I should be able to have that information. Well, I don't. Okay. I don't get it. And so I asked for it from 2010 or 2009 when this governor came in, and he didn't do anything about it. Okay. And now we're getting it. And one of the things that I have asked to be put in there is just that every Monday morning, 11 a.m., a report is on my desk about what the expenditure is, what is intended to be spent in the next week, and what our balances are. Wow. That's so be wonderful. I welcome this assistance that this committee will bring. Okay. I welcome it.
Right. Well, some people listening out there may say, well, it sounds, and I think there's some critics out there who've probably, tried to make people believe or